Alright, so I'm going to take the Ranger out today. I got a bunch of stuff done. I have another video recorded that I started working on, and I haven't uploaded it yet. But I got a bunch of stuff done, and I don't have a boost controller hooked up. I'm probably just going to do it manually because it has the little screw things on it, and set it and just leave it where it is. I did set up an input on the brake, and I can show you the log file or the tune what I'm setting up. I want to get it to where it works, and then I'll show you guys what I'm trying. But I want to try to have it set up where I have a launch, like two-step setup off the brake, and I don't have to use an extra button or anything, so I might have to get creative with that one. Yeah, I think that's it. So I got my analog gauge working for the coolant temp sensor now. I got like a catch can, I got the belt back on, new power steering pump on, power steering line's done, drive that, make sure that doesn't leak. Try to dial in the tune a little bit with some fuel changes and do some rips. And I want to try to, like, the launch control stuff, and we'll see where that ends up. So I think we're starting to make some progress. I messed around with that launch control stuff quite a bit and pulling timing. These brakes are so bad. I pulled like 20 degrees, 25 degrees out. I'll show you the table, but I kind of have to ramp the timing out of it. Like keeping it in and then ramping it out so it'll have enough power to come up on the converter enough. So I think I might not even use the rev limiter, because the way that I have the timing pulled, it won't roll forward, but it'll sit at like 3,200, 3,300 without rev limiter. So I saw like 4-5 pounds at that 3,200. So I think I'm happy with that. But it actually made less boost when it was on the rev limiter. So I'm still going to tweak it a little bit. I did adjust the wastegates. Last pull was 9 pounds. I turned them in a little bit more. We'll see what that makes. And just kind of like plucking away at the fueling. And I just had my fan come loose. The wiring, one of the splices, like melted and came apart. So I noticed that when I pulled over, I was going to adjust the wastegates again, make another pull, and I noticed the fan wasn't on. So caught it when it was at like 210. So no issues, but just working the bugs out. Still only 9 pounds. Alright, so I'm in my normal spot. And there's a police officer up the street here. So sometimes they'll come and sit here. There's like a highway right over there. So I don't know. I don't think he's over here for me. But I'm not going to do my launch that I was going to try to do and test it. Maybe I'll go find somewhere else. But I did just adjust the wastegates again. And last pull was 9 pounds, so which is kind of good. I'm creeping up on it, 7 and then 9, and I'll just keep creeping up on it. Usually I like to swing really big, or that's what I normally do to try to save time. I'll do a pull on wastegate and then like 15 pounds, 18 pounds, so I don't know. I feel like it's okay, fuel should be good, but then it'll give me some more fuel data and stuff. I really got to figure out these brakes, though. If you guys know any good solutions for brakes besides swapping the whole rear end to disc brakes, that might work. But this isn't really going to be like a race truck, you know, so just want to try to launch it a little bit. I guess if it does 3-4 pounds, it should be good. 3-4 pounds, and then I'll run it on the track on like 18, and then maybe finally get a 10. Good about the truck where it's at right now. I'm like getting pretty confident with it because the temperature is really good. That true cool So I'm getting really confident with the truck actually. So that True Cool trans cooler is amazing. I had it like when I was practicing getting up on the two-step. It got to like 180, 190, and then I go drive it, and it's like a 3-4 minute drive at like 50, 60 miles an hour, and it's like coming down to 150 already. It's crazy. It works really, really well. So I'm happy. I am happy I made the switch to that. And coolant temp is fine. Everything just seems fine. Like I could just go drive it. So that's kind of what I wanted to do. I wanted to just be able to drive it and not have to be worried about looking at the gauges all the freaking time. All right, so I'll go through how I set up the 1D table to pull timing using my brake switch. So this is going to be assuming that you have a negative input from your brake switch. Mine was actually a 12 volt positive from my brake switch, so I'll go over that after this section, but this is going to be assuming that you have a ground that's going to be your trigger. It could be a momentary push button, or it could be your brake switch, as long as it's a ground signal that you're sending to the computer.
So one thing to consider when doing this is the brake is going to be activating the rev limiter. So you might have issues at the top of the track when you're hitting the brakes really hard after a hard pull. So just think about that. I do have a condition set up in mind which it needs to see throttle position and the brake signal. So I'll go over that one after. But this one would be better like if you're using a push button, like a momentary push button, then you wouldn't have to worry about any of that.
This is what you would want to do. So go to the spark plug, rev limiters, enable your rev limiter, then go to your pin map, and you'll want to assign your rev limiter. We'll put it on input 1. Click done, and then we'll go to the advanced ICF. If you don't have the advanced ICF box, go to individual config, advanced, and then open the default table, and then you'll get this little box here. So advanced ICF, 1D table. I'm going to enable the 1D table, and then we'll call it, we'll say rev limit, whatever. So we're going to change the axes here. So we want to have timing, offset, and then we're going to do RPM. You could probably set up something different if you want. Think about that as we're going through this, like what else could you use this stuff for? I'm going to go to RPM and then switch enabled. So now that I assigned the pin for the rev limit, after I enable this, I can select that this table will be activated when rev limit 1 is active. So when you push the brake pedal or you push your button, the same button that is activating the rev limit from that input is going to activate this table. So when rev limit 1 is enabled, and you can set up a secondary criteria, which I did, advanced, enable, and you can select and or. So if you want two separate conditions or you want two conditions to be met at the same time. And I'm going to have throttle position above 75%. So when these conditions are met, rev limiter 1, throttle position above 75%, I can select the timing that I want. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go to 5,000 because my rev limiter is not going to be that high. And then we can fill in the rows. And what I can do here is look at the RPM where I want it to be, where I want it to start to pull timing. So let's say 2,000 RPM to maybe my 4,000 RPM rev limit. So maybe here I want it to pull 5 degrees. And here I want it to pull, let's say, negative 20 degrees. This will be different for every setup. So I'm going to go to row values. There we go. So now that's pretty much set up that way. So assuming I have a ground input trigger, the same thing that's triggering my rev limiter is now going to activate this 1D table.
And when I am on the brake, activating that input and throttle position is above a certain percentage, it will pull the timing that I need so I don't roll through the brakes. So that's basically what this is. All right, so we're going to start here and I'll explain kind of what I did. So this is what I ended up with after some testing with how I'm going to pull timing because of my shitty brakes and just pushing through the brakes. So essentially what you have here is a situation where when I push the brake pedal, it's enabled. So I basically get a signal from my brake pedal, and then when the throttle position is above 75%, it will pull timing here. And I started at 5, and then I ramped it out because it needed the timing in it to be able to get the RPM up. I tried just flatlining this thing down here at like 20 degrees, and it would only come up to about 1900 RPM. So this is what I ended up with having enough timing in and then ramping it out so I could get up to about 3,000, 3,300 RPM and then make about 4 pounds of boost. So my situation right here is going to be a little bit different, so I'll go through a couple different ways of how I set this thing up. So my brake switch is a 12-volt output. Some might be like a ground output, but the Holley wants to see ground inputs a lot of the time. So when I set this up originally to go and use the rev limiter here and enable rev limiter, it was giving it a 12-volt input, so the whole thing didn't really work. So instead of coming home and then rewiring everything or adding a relay so I could get a ground input based like off of the 12 volt from the brake switch, I ended up just basically doing it in the Holley. So what I did, it's kind of might be a little bit confusing, so bear with me here. So what I did in this situation was I created a brake input. So this is from the brake pedal. It's a 12-volt input from the brake pedal. I enabled this and gave it a pin. So I'll go through the pins in a little bit. But after the input, I created an output for rev limit. So it's going to be a ground output now. So basically this is the conversion from the 12-volt input to the ground output. So when I configured this, I used a switch input trigger, one switch input trigger, which is going to be from the brake pedal. So when I push the brake pedal, it gives it 12 volt, and then it's enabled, and, not or, I selected and I wanted the throttle position to be above 75%, because this is just going to be for rev limit, launching, and like throttle is going to be down all the time anyways. So when these two criteria are met, it will create a ground output. Following me there? So we have the input from the 12 volt from the brake switch, which creates a ground output. So when I pin this thing, I basically have the brake pedal input, which is a 12 volt input, which created the rev limit output, which is now a ground, and that's what I sent back to my rev limiter 1 input. So I basically just took the wires on the harness, the output wire to the input wire from my output on the ground here, rev limit ground, output 2 to rev limit on input 1. So that allowed me to kind of bypass, I burned an output doing it, but it allowed me to not have to add a relay. So another thing I forgot to mention here on the configuration for the output, I selected 75% too, because this will also allow it to not be activated at the top of the track when you hit the brakes. If you don't add the 75% or the other criteria in there, it'll basically enable the timing pull every time you hit the brakes. So using this additional trigger above 75%, it'll ensure that it doesn't pull the timing out when I'm just get done with a pull and then hit the brakes. So here's the 1D table. Brake condition met, throttle position met, and then this is what it does. So this is so I don't have to go in and actually change the main timing map,
because that's what I used to do with HP tuners. I would go in, same thing when I was using HP tuners in the MSD two-step. The truck would roll through the brakes. It just doesn't have very good brakes. So it would always want to push through before I could build any boost. And what I would do, I had a whole section on the timing table that I would pull like 15 degrees out of just to get it up on the two-step. So now this is basically pulling the timing without having to change the main spark table. So what happens is I push the brake pedal, I get it about 75%. So what I do is I just slam it right to the floor. It meets both criteria, and at the same time, RPM starts to come up, and then as the RPM comes up, it starts to pull timing. And then eventually we'll hit rev limiter. And rev limiter is set here. Go to the spark table, rev limit, and then 3,300 RPM. That's just where I had it set at. And that's what I was doing today.